Have you ever heard of an escape that seemed impossible to avoid, but that ended up being interrupted by something totally unexpected? Imagine a criminal in full attempt to escape the police through the streets of New York, desperately running through the narrow and dark alleys of a residential neighborhood. The adrenaline is up there. The police are on the tail and everything indicates that he will be able to hide or even escape. But suddenly, a simple move completely changes the course of history. A kick in an aged wooden crate reveals a surprising secret. A nest of urban marimbondos hidden there, silent until that moment. Can you imagine the scene? The swarm, which had been quiet until then, suddenly becomes furious. The marimbondos come out en masse, attacking the moving invader in a reaction no one could have predicted. Stay with me until the end, because what happened next is something that will surprise you. The criminal, in the midst of chaos, is completely vulnerable, desperate, trying to escape while the swarm of marimbondos pursues him. Not knowing what to do, he ends up dropping his backpack full of money, falling to the ground and begging for help. The scene goes viral, with residents of the neighborhood recording everything with their cell phones and sharing it on social media. In a few minutes, that simple episode turns into a story that went viral and became news throughout the city. It's hard to imagine that a simple nuisance of nature could help the police catch a criminal, but this story shows that sometimes the universe conspires in very unusual ways. What you will discover now may surprise you even more. How a seemingly successful escape became a lesson in humility for a criminal, and at the same time an entertaining story that was marked in the memory of those who watched. But before we go into the details of what happened, it is important to understand how it all began. What were the actions of the criminal, and what prompted fate to take such an unusual turn? After all, stories like this look like they came out of movies, but this one really happened, right on my corner, in your city, in New York. And the next part will reveal exactly how a simple kick turned a desperate escape into a lesson in natural endurance. If you found this story funny or surprising, leave here in the comments what touched you the most, or what was the part that caught your attention the most. It is always interesting to know what this narrative has awakened in you, whether it is a reflection, a laugh, or a curiosity. Your opinion is important because it helps create a more engaged community where we can exchange experiences and opinions about unusual events like this. Also, if you liked the video so far, be sure to like it. This simple action makes all the difference, so that the content continues to reach more people who, like you, are interested in stories that mix humor, suspense, and a little magic of nature. If you want to stay on top of episodes like this, with real stories that look like something out of a movie, subscribe to the channel. Your participation is essential for us to continue bringing quality content with stories that entertain, surprise, and make you think. Here, we seek to create a space where incredible stories can be shared, reflected, and commented on by people like you, who like to get involved and be part of a community that values human stories and unusual moments. So be sure to activate notifications so as not to miss any news. After all, every comment, every like, and every subscription helps to strengthen this network of stories that often seem even from another world, but in fact take place right here, in our city, in our life. And the best is yet to come, so stay with me to find out all the details of this unbelievable story. It was late afternoon in a residential neighborhood of New York, a time when the city seems to slow down, but at the same time keeps an atmosphere charged with tension. The streets were narrow, marked by worn sidewalks and old buildings that seemed to hold stories from decades past. The alleys, often forgotten by tourists and even locals, stretched like invisible labyrinths where every corner had its secret and every shadow seemed to hide something more than the eye could perceive. In this setting, sunlight was beginning to give way to darker tones, creating a perfect contrast to a chase that had just begun. A robbery had occurred a few minutes earlier, a lightning robbery in a neighborhood store, where the criminal quickly entered, took as much money as he could, and ran away. Police were called immediately, and within minutes were on the scene, with alerts on and sirens breaking the initial silence of the afternoon. The escape attempt looked like a movie scene. The man, frightened, decided to run through the alleys, trying to hide in the complexity of that urban labyrinth. Each step he took increased the adrenaline, while his eyes searched the possibilities of escaping the siege that closed at every moment. The street, in a way, had a sense of apparent calm, but inside everything pulsed with energy. The criminal's hurried footsteps echoed through the brick walls, and his movements were nervous, almost desperate. He knew that if he was caught, the consequence would be severe, so his only hope was to get lost in the vastness of that old neighborhood. The police officers, in turn, were lined up, their eyes attentive, already familiar with the rhythm of this urban hunt. They knew the most common alleys, shortcuts, and escape points well, which gave them an advantage when it came to surrounding the suspect. The escape seemed to be going well for a moment, until suddenly the man kicked an old wooden crate that stood in the middle of the path. In that instant, something that seemed insignificant turned into an unexpected twist. The noise of the impact was loud, and for a second everything was silent as if time had stopped. But what came soon after was something no one could have predicted. The residents of the neighborhood, who followed everything from afar, began to notice a strange movement. From inside the crate, dozens of urban marimbondos emerged, attracted by the movement and the smell of blood, perhaps, or by the simple fact that they were frightened by the disturbance in their silent routine. The reaction was swift and fierce. The marimbondos, usually peaceful when untouched, revolted at the stranger's invasion of their makeshift home. Within seconds, a cloud of insects began to surround the criminal, who was already desperately trying to flee, but now had a greater threat than the police. The insects attacked in a swarm, biting aggressively and incessantly, turning the escape into a race for survival. The assailant, overcome by panic, tried to move away, swinging his arms and screaming in pain, while the pains of the bites were mixed with his attempt to escape from the natural chaos that was established there. At that moment, everything seemed to have become a real battle of resistance, where the force of nature proved more ruthless than any weapon or police chase. Residents, frightened, did not know for sure if it was a common phenomenon or an extraordinary situation, but the scene was recorded by several cell phones, and the videos quickly spread through social networks, going viral in a matter of minutes. What seemed like a desperate escape turned into what many called the day the marimbondos helped the NYPD. And while the criminal tried to get rid of the insects, the story took a new direction, revealing that sometimes the greatest strength of resistance comes from where it is least expected. After breaking into that residence with the haste of those who knew that time was their enemy, the criminal left with a heavy backpack on his back, full of money and an adrenaline rush that seemed to have no end. His heart beat fast, every breath charged with effort and anxiety, as he tried to remain calm even though he knew that the police had already been deployed and were a few steps away from catching up with him. At that moment, he believed that the labyrinth of narrow alleys and dark alleys of New York could be his greatest ally, a kind of natural hiding place against any attempts to capture. As someone who knew the territory well, he was sure that he could throw off the cops, delve deeper into the essence of that old quarter, where every street seemed like an intricate web of possibilities. He moved quickly, almost as if he had done it several times before, but each step seemed charged with a mixture of hope and fear. His eyes scanned the possible routes, looking for shortcuts, open doors, and any sign that he could escape the closing siege. The smell of new money mixed with the sweat of the escape seemed to give strength to his tired legs, while his brain thought fast, calculating every move, every turn. He knew that if he could get through that web of alleys without being seen, he would have a chance to disappear into the big city, to blend in with the crowds and become yet another shadow in the New York night. However, the universe has its own plans, and the expectation of a successful escape is often met with unpredictable obstacles. As he ran, a loose stone under his foot caused him to lose his balance for an instant. It was at this moment that his gaze was fixed on an old wooden crate, almost hidden under a pile of garbage and dry leaves. With a mixture of desperation and distraction, he kicked the object, and that was enough to reveal something no one on the street would have imagined: a nest of urban marimbondos, silent and hidden for a long time in that forgotten corner. The impact was loud and almost silent at the same time, and for an instant it seemed that nothing would happen. But nothing could be further from the truth. The insects, frightened by the invasion, suddenly came out en masse, forming an attacking cloud that quickly spread through the air. Marimbondos, who normally prefer to avoid conflict, reacted immediately and aggressively to sudden movement, as if an instinctive reaction had been activated. The swarm began to surround the criminal, who already had the expression of someone who realized that his escape, no matter how planned, had become a trap. That chain reaction changed everything in seconds. The man, who had tried to maintain his strength and determination, now found himself surrounded by a swarm of insects that did not accept to be disturbed. The bites began to happen almost instantly, and the discomfort turned into pain, a pain that spread to arms, face, back. He tried to disengage, swinging his arms desperately in an attempt to ward off the marimbondos, but the insects were determined to defend their territory. The sound of the fight, mixed with the screams of pain and the noise of sirens, which were already approaching, creating an atmosphere of total chaos. At that moment, it seemed that everything turned into a battle of resistance, where the force of nature manifested itself in a pure and ruthless way. The residents of the neighborhood, who until then observed everything with surprise, began to capture the scene with their cell phones, recording every detail of that episode that would soon become viral. The videos showed a desperate man, trying to escape not only from the police, but also from the swarm of marimbondos who, from one hour to the next, revealed themselves as the protagonists of that almost surreal story. The assailant, surrounded by an unexpected combination of dangers, had his fate sealed at that moment, while natural and human forces intertwined in a narrative that would surely be marked in the memory of those who watched. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because this story reveals much more than a simple escape or an attack of insects. It touches on the essence of how impulsive decisions can turn into unexpected lessons of resistance, adaptation, and transformation. How a seemingly insignificant act, like kicking a crate, can set off a chain of events that change the course of a life, even if momentarily. Just as in the journey of each one, we are often faced with obstacles that seem insurmountable, but that, in fact, carry an opportunity for learning and growth, even if, at first glance, everything seems to be against us. That scene, recorded by locals, didn't just show a man's struggle with insects or a police chase. It revealed a larger impact, a hidden truth about the force of nature, about the effect of our decisions, and about how often the universe puts us in situations that seem out of control to show us how small we are in a world that pulsates with an energy of its own. And it is precisely at this point that the story connects with our own journey of transformation. Because deep down we are all always facing our own dark alleys, our own obstacles, in the hope that in the end we can discover a greater force within us that will help us move forward. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the scene was transforming every second, as if a movie had come to life right there in those narrow streets of New York. The officers, like characters in a well-planned script, moved forward with determination, their quick steps echoing on the uneven pavement, while the suspect, with his heavy backpack and tired body, desperately tried to keep hope of escape. Every corner, every curve of the neighborhood seemed a new opportunity to hide, to lose the chase, but also a greater risk of running into something unpredictable that could put everything at risk. The neighbors, hidden behind the windows or in the doors of their houses, watched everything with wide eyes, as if they were watching a live-action movie, a scene that would be marked in the collective memory of that neighborhood. It was a chase that seemed breathtaking, a real race against time and against fate. The thief, almost without strength, knew that every step he took was a bet on luck, a decision that could define whether he would escape or whether he would finally be captured. He tried to hide in the shadow of a pole, lean against the wall of an old building, but the policemen were always one step ahead of him, with the precision of those who know the terrain and shortcuts of that urban labyrinth well. Every breath was heavy, every movement charged with a mixture of fear and hope. At that moment, it seemed that the entire neighborhood had become a stage, where the narrative unfolded with an almost cinematic intensity, with an atmosphere of suspense that held the attention of those who watched, even from afar. And in that scenario, the criminal's reaction was almost like an internal battle between the survival instinct and the awareness that the escape was perhaps coming to an end. When he turned the corner of an alley, the scene seemed to repeat itself in slow motion. The policeman approached, closing the siege, and the sound of accelerated footsteps seemed to blend into the noise of the surrounding city. At every turn, a decision could change everything. Move forward, retreat, hide, or try one last card. The tension was palpable, as if each move was a chess move where the king was about to fall. At this point, the narrative gains a new layer of impact. The robber, already almost out of strength, realizes that the hope of escaping along the main street is fading, and his mind is filled with doubts. Perhaps it is fatigue, or the awareness that the situation has gotten out of control, but the truth is that every step taken there was a decision that revealed how much our actions can take us to unexpected plat. This point, the narrative gains a new layer of impact. The robber, already almost out of strength, realizes that the hope of escaping along the main street is fading, and his mind is filled with doubts. Perhaps it is fatigue, or the awareness that the situation has gotten out of control, but the truth is that every step taken there was a decision that revealed how much our actions can take us to unexpected places. What seemed like an easy, planned escape turned into a race against fate itself, as the streets of New York, with their lights and shadows, witnessed a scene that, as much as it seemed like a movie, was real. Behind the scenes of this story, there is a reflection that often goes unnoticed. Every decision we make, every path we choose, carries an impact that goes beyond the present moment. And just as in the chase that afternoon, life presents us with obstacles that often seem greater than we, behind the scenes of this story, there is a reflection that often goes unnoticed. Every decision we make, every path we choose, carries an impact that goes beyond the present moment. And just as in the chase that afternoon, life presents us with obstacles that often seem greater than we can bear. But the hidden truth, which only reveals itself in the most difficult hour, is that every journey of transformation requires courage, strength, and the willingness to face the unexpected with an open mind. After all, it is in adversity that we discover who we really are and how far we can go when we believe in our ability to change the course of things. And while that chase scene unfolded, leaving a mark of suspense in the memory of those who accompanied it, one question remained in the air. To what extent do our decisions shape our story? And what impact can a simple choice have, not only on our trajectory but also on those around us? These questions remain, and while that chase scene unfolded, leaving a mark of suspense in the memory of those who accompanied it, one question remained in the air. To what extent do our decisions shape our story? And what impact can a simple choice have, not only on our trajectory, but also on those around us? These questions remain in the air, as do the shadows and lights of that night in New York, which left a silent lesson that often the unexpected is the greatest master of all. And on that journey, what really makes a difference is our ability to see beyond the obvious, to understand the lines, and to realize that behind every choice is an opportunity to start over. Now, I want to go even deeper into this matter, because that moment when the criminal kicked the wooden crate became a kind of dramatic turning point in history. A seemingly simple, quick action, an attempt to get rid of an obstacle or a nuisance, but which in fact carried a much greater impact than he could imagine. And now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because that moment when the criminal kicked the wooden crate became a kind of dramatic turning point in history. A seemingly simple, quick action, an attempt to get rid of an obstacle or a nuisance, but which in fact carried a much greater impact than he could imagine. In the midst of anxiety, exhaustion, and the urgency to flee, he did not realize that by giving that kick, he would trigger a chain of events that would completely change the course of everything. The crate, long hidden in the shadow of that forgotten alley, kept a silent secret, a natural defense that had formed over years of living with the routine of that street. Inside that aged wooden object, there was a nest of urban marimbondos, which remained calm and silent, almost as if waiting for a signal to act. When the impact of the kick hit the structure, what was once a relative peace to inside that aged wooden object, there was a nest of urban marimbondos, which remained calm and silent, almost as if waiting for a signal to act. When the impact of the kick hit the structure, what was once a rel, it was an automatic, instinctive, defensive reaction. The marimbondos, beings who carry an impressive resistance force, realized that their space had been invaded in a violent way, and there, in that instant, the impact of the kick turned into a real revelation about the hidden truth of that story. Because many times, in our haste to achieve goals or run away from problems, we end up ignoring details that may seem small, but that carry a colossal potential for change. What seemed to be a common mistake, a thoughtless action, turned out to be the turning point, the moment when nature showed its strength and put the criminal in a position of vulnerability that he could never have imagined. That reaction from the marimbondos was swift and relentless. They swarmed out, stinging with precision and determination, defending their territory with a ferocity that surprised even those watching from afar. The sound of the stings, mixed with the man's panic, created an almost surreal atmosphere. The pain of the stings began to spread, and he realized that in that instant, his escape had become a battle of survival. The strategy of avoiding the police, who always seemed to be one step ahead, was replaced by the fight against his own body, which responded to natural aggressions with an intensity that he had no way of controlling. The impact of that fatal mistake hit not only the criminal's body but also his mentality, because many times an impulsive decision made in a hurry can trigger consequences that go far beyond what is imagined. And there, in that alley, behind the scenes of a story of escape and natural resistance, revealed a powerful lesson. Sometimes the biggest obstacle is not the police, nor the escape itself, but our own actions, which can open doors to what we do not expect. What seemed to be an attempt to get rid of a momentary problem turned out to be a trap, a revelation that the true strength of natural resistance lies in the ability to defend your own space, even when everything seems to be against us. And at that moment, the narrative deepens even more, as it reveals that every detail, no matter how insignificant it may seem, has the potential to alter the course of a story. A simple kick, a hasty decision, can be the trigger for an unexpected transformation, be it pain, learning, or adaptation. And that day, what seemed like a quick escape without consequences turned into a remarkable episode, which left a lesson in the memory of those who watched. Sometimes the greatest strength of resistance comes from within, from an instinctive reaction that, even in the face of fear, shows that life always finds a way to teach, even in the most difficult moments. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because that moment of absolute chaos was, in fact, a kind of natural climax of history where everything intensified unexpectedly. The swarm, which previously seemed only a silent threat, turned into a ruthless force, a real stinging storm that surrounded the robber in a matter of seconds. It was not just a defensive reaction, but a manifestation of nature's own strength against the invasion of her space. As he desperately tried to extricate himself from the stings, the scene turned into a mixture of panic, pain, and confusion, as if the universe had decided to show its wildest face in that instant. The cry that came out of his mouth was one of pain, but also of despair, a sound that echoed down the alley and mingled with the incessant buzzing of insects. His arms, which previously carried the backpack full of money, now moved frantically in an attempt to push away the marimbondos, who stung non-stop, as if they wanted to leave an eternal mark on his skin. The backpack, symbol of his escape attempt and momentary success, was left aside, dropped there on the floor in a hurry to get rid of the stings. In a matter of seconds, his entire escape strategy turned into a scene of horror, a nightmare in broad daylight, as he writhed and tried to flee from that natural attack, as relentless as a force majeure. That moment was a real revelation, proof that often our impulsive actions can trigger consequences that seem to get out of control. What was a planned escape from the police turned into a battle for survival, a fight against intense pain, fear, and vulnerability itself. The insects, which were previously hidden, have shown their strength of resistance and their defense capacity, proving that even the smallest beings can be ruthless when their spaces are invaded. The scene was marked in the memory of all who watched, not only by chaos, but by the impact of a natural force that, even silently, manages to turn what seemed like an ordinary escape into an epic battle. The pain from the stings was acute, almost unbearable, and the man fell to his knees on the ground trying to protect himself from a final onslaught of insects. His movements were increasingly disorganized as the stings inflamed his skin, leaving marks that seemed etched forever. At that moment, his mentality, which he had previously hoped to escape, was completely destroyed by the impact of that natural attack. That moment showed that no matter how much we plan, no matter how courageous and determined, sometimes the universe responds in a way that we cannot foresee, forcing us to confront our vulnerability in a harsh but true way. Chaos ensued once and for all. The residents, who watched everything with frightened eyes, saw a scene that looked like something out of a thriller, with the protagonist fighting against a force that seemed unstoppable. And it was at that moment that the story gained a new dimension, revealing that resistance is not only in human strategies or physical strength, it is also manifested in the ability to adapt, to resist, and to understand that, many times, the impact of our decisions is greater than we can imagine. What seemed like a successful escape turned into a lesson in humility, a reminder that in life's journey the unexpected can always emerge from the shadows, and that when we least expect it, the force of nature puts us in our place. This experience, however, was not only a lesson in pain and endurance. It also revealed a hidden truth, that the moments of greatest chaos often carry the seeds of profound transformation. When the man fell there, surrounded by insects and pain, he found himself completely vulnerable, but also at a turning point. Because often, it is in pain that we find our true strength, the one that is born of the ability to overcome the unexpected, to rise again even after a humiliating defeat. And while the marimbondos continued to sting, that instant became a living metaphor that, on the journey of transformation, it takes courage to face chaos, to recognize our weaknesses, and above all, to learn from each impact that life offers us. The scene, which until then seemed like a simple chase, had turned into something that left the entire community around there open-mouthed. The neighbors who were just watching from afar could hardly believe their eyes. It was as if nature itself had decided to enter the history of that day, acting unexpectedly and surprisingly. Some of them had picked up their cell phones, moved by a mixture of amazement and curiosity, and started recording every moment of that almost surreal episode. The scene of the criminal surrounded by the marimbondos and the desperate fight for his survival spread quickly through social networks, gaining attention from those who like stories that seemed to have come out of a movie, but that, in fact, were real. In that neighborhood, the general impression was that the insects had become a kind of ally of the police, a natural force that, without any effort, had made the escape of the criminal an impossible mission. The residents who watched everything closely commented among themselves, shocked, as if each was witnessing an important revelation about the invisible forces at work in the lives of all of us. It was a mixture of admiration for the strength of the insects and disbelief at such an unusual scene. Some, with their cell phones in hand, shared videos and photos, wanting to show friends, family, or even strangers on the internet that the universe has its own ways of acting, often in a way that defies all logic. The impact of that moment on the community was great. After all, it was unusual to see such a scene, where the force of nature seemed to be on the side of human forces, helping in the capture of a criminal in a completely natural way. This realization brought a kind of hope that even in the most difficult situations, something greater than our human strategies can act in unexpected ways. The comments on the network soon multiplied, with people reflecting on the power of small beings and the importance of respecting natural balance. The story of the day the marimbondos helped the police became a kind of symbol of resistance, a reminder that everything in life is interconnected and that often the most unusual solutions come from where you least expect them. At the same time, this community reaction has brought deeper reflection on how we perceive the strength, impact, and decisions we make in the face of moments of crisis. The residents, by recording everything and sharing, were not only spreading a funny or dramatic video, but also reaffirming that life is made of unpredictable backstage, where every detail can make all the difference. The often underestimated force of nature played a starring role in that day's story, highlighting that when we least expect it, the universe can manifest in ways that challenge our convictions and teach us about resilience, adaptation, and the hidden truth that everything is connected. In this scenario of surprise and admiration, what is evident is that the community, witnessing this event, also underwent a silent transformation. The realization that natural forces can act as allies, even if unintentionally, reinforces a new mindset. A mindset that values what is often considered small, invisible, or insignificant, but which has a huge impact on our journey. Thus, the story of that day became a reminder that life has its own paths of resistance, that strength can arise in places and forms we would never have imagined, and that sometimes the greatest revelation lies in the simplicity of an insect defending its space. He said, "That makes sense to me." Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the outcome of that story, although it seems somewhat predictable, reveals a powerful lesson about the impact of decisions we make at the right time. When the officers finally reached the alley, the scene that turned out was like a final chapter in a dramatic play. The man, already exhausted, was lying on the ground, covered with stings and with his face marked by pain and fright. His breathing was heavy, his eyes filled with regret, and at the same time with helplessness. That moment of maximum fragility seemed almost like a kind of natural justice, a response of life itself to the impulsive actions he had taken minutes before. The police officers, who until then had only the mission of capturing him, acted quickly and accurately. There was no need for much effort or confrontation because nature itself had done the hard work. The invasion of the swarm of marimbondos had weakened their resistance, and upon arriving there, they found a man who seemed to be in a state of defeat, almost as if the life force was being drained by that insurmountable pain. It was a quick, efficient arrest, almost as if everything was aligned so that this unusual episode had an outcome that would be marked in the history of the region. The scene, which to some seemed like a simple police capture, actually carried a deeper message. The story of that day has become a symbol of how our own actions, often taken in haste or despair, can lead us into situations that seem out of control, but which in essence are responses to the impact of our choices. The force of nature, which until then seemed a secondary detail in the escape, showed its most ruthless face, reminding that everything in the universe has its time, its rhythm, and its consequences. That man who tried to escape with everything he had ended up being the victim of precisely the effect of an impulsive decision, a reaction that, in the end, became a lesson about resistance, adaptation, and above all, about the impact of our decisions on the journey of life. And when reflecting on all this, it becomes clear that the story does not end only with imprisonment. In fact, it leaves a deeper mark, an understanding that often what seems like a momentary defeat can actually be a learning opportunity. Because as we look at that final scene, the fallen man, surrounded by the cops, covered in stings, begging for help, we can realize that life always gives signs, always reveals the hidden truth behind every choice. And these revelations, however painful at the time, serve to remind us that every decision has the power to transform our path, to reveal our inner strengths, and to show us that on the journey of transformation, the truest resistance comes from within, fueled by the understanding that it is all part of a great learning. At the same time, this story reinforces that there are times when life puts us in front of tests that seem to end everything once and for all, but in fact, they function as a mirror that reflects our own actions, our own decisions, and challenges us to understand that the impact of each choice is a fundamental piece in the construction of our history. In that final moment, when the man is taken into custody, there is a feeling that despite all the turmoil, the journey is not over yet, because every experience, no matter how difficult, brings an opportunity for reflection and transformation. It is at this moment that we realize that the biggest lessons often come from the chaos, the consequences of our actions, and how important it is to be attentive to our decisions, even in the most hurried hours. Thus, life teaches us that even in the most adverse situations, there is always a chance to start over, to learn from the impact, and to move forward with more strength, knowing that each step is part of a greater journey of inner growth. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because this story clearly shows how life often reveals its hidden truths precisely at the most unexpected moments. That episode, marked by the marimbondo's attack on the criminal, works as a powerful metaphor for how our actions, often taken impulsively or unwittingly, can trigger responses we never imagined. Every decision, no matter how small it may seem, carries an impact that reverberates through time and space, creating a chain of events that can completely change the course of a story. And the most interesting thing is that this chain is not always something that we can predict or control, because it is often guided by invisible forces, by the so-called laws of the universe that act behind the scenes of everything we do. When we reflect on this episode, we realize that natural resistance, that force that insects represented, reveals a hidden truth about the impact of the forces of nature, which often operate in silent, almost subliminal ways, but which do not cease to be powerful. They teach us that no matter how hard we try to plan, control, or escape from some situation, there is always one variable that can completely change the outcome. This variable can be in our decisions, in our mentality, or simply in the impact of something that seems small, but that in fact has an immense transformative force. Learning to understand these behind the scenes of life is one of the greatest growth lessons we can acquire. It's as if the whole story of that day has been a great lesson in resilience, adaptation, and connection with what really matters. our ability to learn from impacts, to recover from falls, and to understand that often the universe works in our favor, even when everything seems to fall apart. This narrative also reveals to us that the deepest revelations come from moments of crisis. When we face difficulties, when we are caught by surprise, or when our decisions seem to put us at a crossroads, it is precisely at this moment that we find the greatest opportunities for transformation. Because at the time of impact, we can choose between giving in to discouragement or using that experience as a source of learning. What happened to that man, for example, was a kind of brutal but at the same time sincere lesson that everything we do has consequences, good or bad, and that in the journey of growth there is no victory without the ability to cope with the impacts of our actions. It is important to understand that this story goes beyond a simple, frustrated escape. It reveals a universal truth. The universe is a great mirror which reflects what we plant, and often the biggest barriers we face come from within ourselves, from our impulsive choices or our way of facing obstacles. When we realize this, we begin to understand that true transformation begins in our mindset, in the way we interpret difficulties, and in our willingness to learn from them. And in doing so, we come to see that even a seemingly negative situation can turn into an opportunity for growth, a chance to strengthen our resilience and to discover internal forces that we didn't even know existed. This story also reinforces the importance of being attentive to the small manifestations of the universe, to the clues that often fail to go unnoticed. It is these signs, these details that seem silly, that carry a message that everything is connected, and that in the complexity of life nothing happens by chance. Every impact, every decision, every reaction, no matter how insignificant it may seem at the time, is part of a great cycle of learning and evolution. When we begin to realize this, we come to understand that our journey is made up of chapters that intelligently intertwine, often guided by forces that we cannot see, but that act in powerful ways to teach us the value of learning, of accepting the impact, and of moving forward with more strength and wisdom. And thinking about all this, it is clear that this story of natural resistance, impact, and hidden revelations in chaos is a great lesson that life is a constant transformation. And it challenges us to open our eyes, to realize that the biggest changes come from within, that our decisions shape our destiny, and that often the deepest answers are hidden in the simplest details. After all, the universe is a great mirror, which reflects who we are, what we do, and what we decide to accept. And by understanding this game of impact and reaction, we can begin to build a stronger, more resilient mindset, capable of turning any situation, no matter how difficult it may seem, into an opportunity for growth and connection with the true self. If you made it this far, it's because you really connected with this story, and I'm glad you did. These small lessons that we find in the most unusual situations remind us of how life is full of details that often go unnoticed, but that carry great meaning. I hope this content has helped you reflect on the impact of our actions, on the strength we can discover within ourselves, and on the importance of being aware of the small manifestations of the universe. So, if you thought this topic brought some value to your day, consider subscribing to the channel. Here we seek to share stories and learnings that can help you see the world with more attention and positivity. Leave a comment saying that I'm with you until the end, or that this message was for you, because it helps create a true connection between us. Also take the opportunity to leave your like in a very natural way, like who is talking to a friend. It's a way to strengthen that exchange, to show that the content makes sense to you. And if you like the topic, there is a video here on the side that complements this conversation well. Click there and continue with me there, because there is always something new to learn or reflect. It was a pleasure to have you here until the end. Here, the idea is always to bring light messages that make us think and that can make a difference in your day-to-day. So until next time, and remember, the force of transformation is within each of us. Just pay attention to the little things and move forward confidently.